Good morning. We're going to make it so we can actually do a lot more within our app, so we can add a lot more functionality, so our app can even do even more. What we're going to make it so as our app can do, so I can actually change what's inside my app, I'm going to add the functionality of both the edit and the add button, so we can either change things by removing things out of the actual structure we're working with, and that we can also add new things to it. So we're going to take a look at what we need to do to make that happen, and how we can do that inside our project. So I can click on right here, I can simply add it. I can add new bucket item, and this is demo. And what do we do? Make an item. I click on Add Bucket Item, and I scroll all the way up to the top. Let me scroll all the way up here eventually. And there's that new item we just made. I can do a new one right here just to make sure it's actually working. And new item. And what's the goal? Stuff. And boom, I've got the stuff and new item. And because, of course, the emojis are dynamically generated, those get reassigned every single time. That's no big deal. I can also use the edit button right here, so I can go ahead and take things right out of the list like that. And I can hit done. It's out of there. I can even go like that and delete things that way. So I can do some really cool stuff with that. So let's go ahead and take a look at the code to see what we need to do to make that happen and go from there. So you want to make a new Swift file inside your controller group. I called mine AddBucketItem because we're adding new buckets of things or bucket list items that people can do. And so the first thing we're going to need to do, because this is going to be directly linked to binding/state value, go ahead and delete out that lovely information for the preview, because we're not going to be previewing this at all, so you don't need to worry about that. What we're going to do right here is we're going to use the amazing power of duplication and assignability. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to compose a component piece that we can use multiple times, because reusability is a big thing we want to do in computer science. And so we're going to make an input field. It's a compound field we can use later on. If this is a bigger scale project, input field would be its own .swift file inside a project, and we then make it even more extensible and usable as we go along with it. But for right now, this is good to go. So we'll make a struct called InputField, and as you can see, that struct right here, of course, conforms to the Vue protocol. We're going to have a let title be of type string and let hint be a string. These are single-use variables again because we only have to assign to them once, so we just do it right there. Now we also have an app binding var. We're linking this to data, and so the app binding var is a result of what we're doing. So it's good. We're using that text field, and that's how we're going to time what the user types into their field with their phone and their thumb like that, or their tablet, or whatever device they're happening to run this on. We can grab that information from that, and so it has to be a binding value. Then we have our var body, of course, conforms to some view. We're going to use a VStack to hold the pieces together. As you can see, I've got a leading alignment, so it's all left justified for US or English users. If you're using a language that goes left to right or right to left instead of that, it'll be all right justified, using that power of the leading so it works on the language of the system that you're working with right now. The first parameter inside, the first element inside that we're using is a text element. We're going to set the font to be a headline, multi-line text element leading, and we're going to explicitly disable autocorrection to make sure we don't have any layout bug errors, because there's a current bug right now in layout, so we want to make sure we don't have any autocorrect, and that's just what we're doing anyway, so no big deal. The next component we're going to do is the text field, and the text field is the one that we're actually going to be typing inside, and we're going to pass this to the text field. We're going to pass the hint data member, or that property right here that we have inside that structure. And then the second parameter of the text field is the $result. Remember again that we talked about this when we're talking to the app binding or a state. The $sign is how I link back. It's the hook back to the value. And so the text $result is how I hook back to whatever the user types in to that text field. And again, we're explicitly disabling the auto correction on that, so we can make sure that we don't have any way of having an error in that. Eventually Swift will get past that error, and we'll go ahead and get past that. This is a great spot to pause and move on so we can get that taken care of. So just take care of that before we move. Now that we're going to start off, and we're going to take a look at the actual struct, that the main thing we're working with. That's the AddButtonItem struct. And the AddBucketItem struct right here, as you can see, we've got a data member section, we've got a body, and of course we have a func right here. We're going to start with the data member first, and then we're going to go talk about the function, and then we'll finally take a look at the actual body and see all the savings that we have because of that. So the first thing we have inside our data member section is the @environment presentation mode. And @environment presentation mode is like, hey, I want to have a pop-up window. I want to block access to what I'm looking at. Like I'm using a mask right now, so I want to cover what I'm actually talking to. And so that presentation mode is what's going to allow me to have access to that modal window. Modal is the word we're looking for that. And I'm calling that var presentation mode. We also have an addObserved object. That's how I'm going to go talk to that specific data store we've been working with inside our project already. In this case, bucket store. If you're doing a project with cars or planes or something else, you'd be having your store attached to that data store right there, or database you're working with. And again, it's using the addObserved object annotation, so we explicitly know that there's one thing we're talking about, and we can assign data to it explicitly. Then we have our two state variables that we have to use to reference this because we're talking about a bucket item and we need to have an author of the bucket item and we have the actual bucket list item itself. And those are both strings and we want to give them a default value just so we don't have to have a specialized in it anyway. So that's what we've got for this to start off right now. Then we have, of course, is our func AddBucketItem. It's a void method and it makes it really easy because it's simply just going to execute some code. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a year value. Now we're going to simply just ask the calendar to go ahead and get the year from the current date. So if I were in the year 2053, using the magic power of time travel, that would be 2053 is the value of the assigning year. Or if I travel back in time to 74, gets that value as well. All that's doing is asking the phone, hey, what's your date right now? Grab that value and store it as a variable year, which happens to be an int. I'm then going to make a brand new cool bucket item. Yeah, I know. And it's going to be a bucket list item. And I'm going to pass it for the ID. Now, previously, when we did the bucket list item, the ID was something generated from an Excel spreadsheet that we then downloaded and exported to a JSON file. But now, because I don't have access to the original formula, I need to give it a new unique value. So I'm going to use the uuid.uuid string, which says I'm going to get something really, really close to guaranteed unique and plug that in as the ID for that. Okay, cool. What year? Oh, the year I just generated right there. And finally, I need to attach a creature and a goal. And that's where we link back to the existing values of author and bucket item that are the state variables inside the AddBucketItem. And again, I'm referencing the state values in this, not the linked values that are using the $, because again, I'm attaching them, then I'm working with it right here. And finally, the last piece I need to do is I have self.presentationMode.wrapValueDismiss, which is saying when I get back to my original screen, I'm going to go put this back on and unblock it so I can get access to it. So once I'm done, I'm going to unblock it and I get access to the original view that I'm working with. Because when I dismiss it, the mask or the modal window gets taken off because that's what we're going to have that happen. Now that we've got those pieces done, let's go ahead and take a look at the view. Now the view that we have right here, you can see we're using a form element. A form element is a specialized form of the stack. It's designed to hold pieces together that the user wants to actually do something with. Oh, okay, cool. The first thing we have is a section inside there. I'm giving it a text, say new bucket item info, and I'm attaching some modifiers for font, foreground color, and multi-line text alignment. Of course, you can change all of that. The one thing I do want to bring your attention to is that the closing parenthesis right here down on the bottom, because all those modifiers we're working with are modifiers on the text and not on the section itself. Inside the section, however, I have two input fields. Now, those two input fields would be replaced by that pile of 15 lines each of code if I didn't have them. So by using a reusability of making a new struct called input field, I made it so I don't have two giant piles of code. Instead, I have 2 lines of code. Yeah, I know. It's pretty amazing. The first input field, I'm going to pass it a title of creature and the hint, what creature made the goal, and then I'm using that binding value of $author so I can link from the result, get that bound value from it, and link it to the state value of author. And that's where that hook value comes into play of using the $ again. Same approach then on the goal. Goal, what goal? Oh, that's going to store it into the bucket item. So I can link those values directly back in and go from there. Finally, we're going to have a button that's calling add a bucket item, and it's doing the call the action add bucket item, which will go back and actually store those values for us like we just looked at again. So that's what we first have to do to make that happen. So add bucket item is the first piece we have to have. The next change we have to do to make AddBucketItem work properly is we have to go ahead and go into our data view, and we have add a couple data members to make that happen and make some changes to the actual user interface. Is up here in our data member section of the data view, you can see we have the @environment presentation mode presentation. So again, it's that same approach right there. So I'm saying, oh, I have a presentation mode. Do I have a mask on or not? And that's what we're working with right there. It's a way to actually, am I masking that information? Then I have an associated value state var, which is show add item. I have a variable that is, should I show this or not? And it's a Boolean, and I default as false. So that's the first thing I have to have is the data member modifications. I've collapsed out my list that I'm working with, and so because that's where we're making the changes. Attaching to the list, I'm going to add some navigation bar items. I'm attaching 2 different things to that. On the leading side, I'm adding an edit button, which does all the magic work for me. The edit button does the ability to make all those things happen. On the trailing side, I'm adding a button, but I'm doing a little bit differently. I'm adding a button that has an action and doing a single line block of code, self.showAddItem toggle. So the showAddItem state variable is going to go either true, false, etc. Just based on the result of what we're doing for that. It toggles the existing value. Linking to that, I have an image using the system plus, which uses that built-in plus symbol that we saw earlier when we looked at the app. Then attached to the navigation view, I'm using the sheet is presented modifier. The sheet is presented says, hey, look at the hooked value of showAddItem. Look inside that. See what's going inside that state variable. And if it's true, then I want to do the AddBucketItem. And when I click that button, it should toggle it, so it would be true. When I get back on the other side, it turns it back to false because that's that wrapped item dismiss does. And so then right here on that show, if it's time to show it, then I'm going to go ahead and initialize the AddBucketItem screen, passing a reference to the bucket store so I can talk to the existing single self data set. And that makes it so I can go ahead and add items right to it. Finally, the last thing we have is the remove items. Remove items has two little components to it. The first thing we have to do is inside our section on the ForEach is we have right here the ForEach for the bucket store. We have to do an onDelete and we pass it perform remove items. That says for each item in there, we can actually remove them. And when we do want to remove them, we have that private func remove items, the one that exists right here. And we can say, hey, remove items, add offsets, index set, and it returns void. And bucket store, I'm going to go to the bucket store. I'm going to look inside the bucket store, get the buckets out of it, and I'm going to remove the ones specified at offsets. Now, notice that when I use this right here, when I simply just perform remove items, that at offsets information that is being passed as a parameter in there, that's stored behind the scenes inside that ForEach. The ForEach knows which ones you're talking to because the ForEach is doing for each thing inside that structure, oh, I know which ones I'm talking to. It knows the at offsets. So the perform itself doesn't have to explicitly call that because of the way the structure of the signature is passed. It has to be a void method. It needs the index sets the parameter. It automatically has an information saved inside it. And that allows me so I can go ahead and remove things in there and go from there. So by doing those changes, by adding the onDelete inside the ForEach, by adding the navigation bar to the list and adding the .sheet is presented to the navigation view, I make it so I can go ahead and make my app do even more amazing things than it has been doing. I can scroll through it like this. I can use the edit button to remove things like here by clicking on that and removing right there, and then click remove, or click right here and hit remove. When I'm done, it's gone away. Or I can manually remove them by simply swiping in from the right to the left. Or I can add a brand new thing, new bucket item, and demo again, and cool code. Add a bucket item, boom, right there at the top, we've added new things. And so that's how we've made it so we can do even more stuff inside our app, have an even better app and do great things. Thanks again, hope you had a great time, and we'll work with you some more and do even more amazing things. Cheers.